One of my favorite new features of Illustrator CS5 is the Shape Builder tool, and with good reason. The ability to choose specific overlapping parts of shapes and combine them into new ones with a simple click and drag introduces an incredibly easy way to create complex shapes that would take 10 times longer using the old processes. In the same vein, the Shape Builder tool can also be used to trim off excess pieces of shapes, like a cookie cutter, and that's just plain fun. So let's use this wonderful new tool to create the perfect logo for our bicycle tour company, and along the way see how Pathfinder, Select Same, and the new drawing modes can help us in this process. So as well as the logo type or the emblem that we have here, we actually want to create an official logo for our company. Now this logo wants to suggest all roads meeting in the middle. If you can imagine being up in the sky and looking down at the top of a mountain, you'd have the peak or the summit in the middle, and all of these roads that come up from the valleys or wherever would all converge at this one point, and that's exactly what I want to convey with this design. Now we'll have to construct this logo from a series of overlapping objects and lines which are all centered and radially arranged, but then cut and separate them into different pieces so that we can color them, and this is going to give us a really complex shape in order to show you some of the very cool construction options inside of Illustrator. So this will be pretty fun to do. Now we need to do this in another document, and I've already got one prepared, so let's bring up our open dialog box and go down into your project files on the desktop, open the Illustrator files, and we'll open this file called Ch logo. Now if you go ahead and open it, you'll see it's completely blank. There's nothing in here, but I just pre-prepared it, so we've got no swatches in here and that kind of thing. Alright, now before we start drawing, because we are going to be using white as a color, having our transparency here set to white and gray is going to be a little bit hard to focus on, so I'm just going to go in and change here under the document setup, go and click on the white swatch here for our small grid, and just introduce a little bit of gray into that. Okay, so we can still see the differences in the transparency, but we will see pure white when it sits on top. It's kind of a personal preference thing there. What we're going to do is we're going to draw a series of rectangles, okay? So go ahead and select your rectangle tool, and before we draw anything, let's double check our colors. We are going to fill with white, but we do want to make sure that we select the stroke and say none, okay? Go back and select the fill afterwards. Now we're going to start drawing everything from the direct center. Now if I go ahead and turn off my transparency for a second, you can see our smart guides are so smart. They tell us exactly where the center of the artboard is, which I think is really wonderful. So turning my transparency back on, keeping my cursor where it is, we want to draw from the center with the dialog box. So if you remember the keyboard shortcuts for this, we're going to hold down the Option key or the Alt on the PC and simply click to bring up a dialog box drawing from the middle. Our first shape is going to be 2 millimeters wide by 60 millimeters deep. All right, go ahead and say OK. And then we can zoom in a little bit closer. Now, before we draw the next shape, we could come up against a potential problem here that we've seen earlier on. You remember when we had our wheel graphic and we drew all of the circles, and then we did an example where if we fill them all with a color, some of the circles disappeared because the order in which they were drawn defined their stacking order on the page, okay? And we had to do bring to front and center back. Well, this has long been a process you have to go through in Illustrator, but there's a new feature in CS5 which actually takes that function out of the equation, which is very cool. Basically, down here in the lower side of the Tools panel, we have these three small icons, and these are your drawing modes. Now, if you have a single column tool panel, you'll only see one option at a time. Now, you can press Shift-D to switch modes, or click on the icon to view the other options, or you can even click on the double arrow icon at the top of your toolbar to make it a double column, as I have here. Either way, you can find all of the options. The first one we have is normal, which is your standard. Every shape you draw is automatically on top of the previous one, and that's really very much a normal process. However, the next one, this is very cool. Draw behind. Let's go ahead and select that. Now, every shape that we draw will automatically appear behind the other one, okay? So it saves us a lot of bring to front and center back. So let's position our cursor once again in the center, Option click to bring up that dialog box, and we'll change this one to 8 millimeters wide and still at 60 millimeters deep. Go ahead and say OK. Whilst we've got it selected, let's come into the colors and just fill it with black, and there you can see it is behind the other shape. So very, very cool option to have. Now, whilst we have that mode selected, let's go ahead and create our third and final shape just by bringing up the dialog box in the center again, and making this one 14 by 60 millimeters. Click OK, and let's choose maybe a light blue for this. Now I'm just going to go back to the main selection tool so we don't create any additional shapes, and at this point, just to be consistent and safe, let's go back and choose our normal drawing mode so we're not confused in the future as to why objects don't appear in front of other ones. Again, it's one of those things you need to bounce back and forth between, but it's very cool that that's now in Illustrator.